Okay, we're going to get going over here on the Bitcoin mining stage. If you are out there in the crowd and you want to learn a little bit about immersion mining this morning, well, you are in the right place. Come and take a seat. We're going to get everyone going. Nick Gates, if you can come up to stage. Nick is our awesome moderator for today. This topic is on immersion mining.
Which I'm just moderating. Don't worry. You don't have to listen to my thoughts on immersion, air, or hydro. First, coming up to the stage, we have a guy that is known as a world-famous garage tinker, Russell Can with Core Scientific. Mike Donovan, parent company is HTS, the booth over there, GRC. They've been doing it a long time in traditional industries, and they're coming to the mining space, have been in it for a little while, and they're doing some pretty cool things. And then the guy with the most facilities on the list, Shannon Squires with Compass Mining. He's been in it a little while and worked for a few different companies in the past, so seen quite a few things. Appreciate everyone's time coming out and listening. As a world-famous garage tinker, how many different cooling systems have you tried at your house?
That's not a good question. But this panel is about cooling. So it's not just about immersion. It's not just about water cooling or air cooled. And kind of what we've been talking about is during this panel discussion today, we're going to talk about exactly different ways and different environments and which type of cooling methods work best for different environments.
That's a much better way to answer that question. Mike, as a guy that's always saying this space feels like it's a bunch of guys designing it in their garage and a much more traditional background when it comes to cooling traditional data centers. What are some of the mistakes you guys are seeing in other designs out there and the conversations that are happening right now? What are the biggest lessons miners can learn from traditional data centers evolution over time?
Well, I think I appreciate that, Nick. The traditional data center space is not unlike all the other institutional spaces that require precision cooling, healthcare laboratories, even higher education spaces need precision cooling. And, all three of these, air cooling and immersion and hydro, would need to be vetted and decided on, well in advance whenever someone's going to expend capital dollars for whatever their next adventure is, whether that's a traditional data center or a mining facility. And they all have their pluses and minuses for sure. I guess would you say I use the word adult supervision to the mining space because of all the other traditional large commercial industrial, either it's automotive manufacturing or battery or industrial manufacturing. There's a lot of engineering design and standards of care that go into that before it's deployed. And then the vendors and the contractors and the support for those facilities are vetted with like 25 years of resume or definitely financial capitalization. So it's just a different space. And I see the mining space starting to go there with the larger installations, and the clients are vetting those folks that get involved, because not all immersion tanks are created the same. Not all immersion cooling for tanks, not all air cooling is created equal. So I'm seeing the maturity of the mining space, right before our eyes.
That's a very good answer. And in terms of maturity, one of the things that has matured quite a bit is the heat density on a machine level. We used to run S9s, the number of watts flowing through a new miner. Russell, how much does that evolution keep going, and how much does that start affecting your decisions on cooling? If we get up to 10,000 kilowatts per machine, are you going to be switching?
So let's give you a little background here. So at Core, we've deployed at this point around 760,000 machines from 16 different manufacturers. In the first 500,000 of those machines, we expected those machines to be replaced in about 3 years. So when the silicon cycle was advancing as fast as it was, we made decisions, as a miner, you made decisions based on the fact that the longevity of the silicon you were looking for was only a few years. So a lot of times you'd want to make decisions to get your machine up as fast as you can, knowing that it's going to brick very shortly. With that said, the past 250,000 machines we've deployed, starting with the 7 nanometer, moving to the 5, the 4, the 3 that's going to be coming out, we think these machines have almost infinite life depending on hash price, depending on what the network goes for. So when you're designing your facilities, whether they're air-cooled, immersion, or hydro, or water at the chip, whatever they are, it's all about designing your facility for longevity of your machine. So you want to make sure that if it's an air-cooled facility, at Core, we have 724 megawatts running in 5 different states. It's running in West Texas in the desert, and it's running at negative 60 degrees Fahrenheit in North Dakota. And those are very different. It's also running in a perfect little environment at 2,000 feet of elevation in North Carolina, where it's always between 40 and 70 degrees, right? So you have to design your facilities based on where your environment is and then the longevity of the machine. So, sorry for the long introduction to that, but as machines increase in density, you need to make sure that your facilities are prepared for that. And so, short answer is, Core's traditional facilities have all been air-cooled. If I look out into the future, I guarantee you some of our facilities are going to be immersion, because we're already testing immersion in every site. But it's all about longevity of machine.
That actually segues nicely. Talking about diversity of locations, I have to get my phone out for this one. Shannon, with sites in Texas, Oklahoma, Manitoba, Ontario, Indiana, Ohio, Nebraska, Nevada, Indiana, North Carolina, and Labrador, Canada, how much does the climate come into account, and what factors of the climate? Is it just the temperature, or are there other factors that you're looking at whenever you're trying to decide what kind of technology to be using?
Yeah, across all climates, like there's a lot of factors, as you guys have already discussed. Is every climate's going to be a little different, and you're going to have a little different expectations. Like you mentioned, originally the life cycle of these miners was much shorter, and now we're looking at longer life cycles. When you're looking at short life cycles, that cost of infrastructure is a big thing. So air-cooled infrastructure is literally chicken coops, kind of like you were alluding to. Like Bitcoin mining is just run fast, do it quick, and kind of move on, versus the traditional space. So when we look across that, originally it was, just air facilities all over the place, and then figure out how to manage it. So if you're in Texas and you're doing an air facility and it's 104 in the middle of summer, you're just happy ERCOT's curtailing because your miners aren't running anyways. On the other side of that spectrum, when, your air container is pulling snow through the Mervate filters in, Minnesota, it creates a different issue. Over the last year, I've actually got to experience a lot with dew point changes and, in air facilities, where you're managing to make sure you don't get condensation on the intake side of the miners, because the temperature there on one side, the miner's heating up, temperature on the other causes the water to condense. So hydro and immersion and other cooling technologies that control the environment. When you're dealing with air, it's just whatever the environment's getting you. And so a lot of our focus on the immersion has been, okay, if I put in an immersion tank, I can fully control that environment. I can always make sure this miner just has this perfect thing. I can really trust that it's going to continue operating in that standpoint. And then our biggest thing is, okay, but there's that cost to capital is when we deal with those sites. So traditionally, when we're looking at shorter lifespan of miners, that was the biggest thing, and probably the reason why everything is air. Probably the reason Core is all air up to this point, and now we're all looking at hydro, immersion, other cooling systems, because we expect these future generation of miners to be sitting there for longer than 3 years, minimum 5, and trying to expand that if possible, unless, we get some fancy, crazy efficiency gains below 3 nanometer in the future, which seems unrealistic.
All right. Great answer. So, Mike, all the miners are heavily competing against each other, and any sort of gain that they can get over their competitor is a distinct advantage. So intellectual property and a lot of that has been done in-house for several miners. What is your argument that they should come to a third-party firm like yours, GRC, HTS, and share the information?
Yeah, so, our company was built 30 years ago in a space where, whether it's data center, healthcare, public education, manufacturing, hotels, this kind of facility, when we sell equipment and equipment systems and building controls for these buildings, these clients are expecting a 25-year life cycle. And so that's the kind of care and the design engineering that we have, is our stuff has got to last that long, because that's about the frequency of when clients look to replace chillers, boilers, towers, controls or pumping systems. So that kind of message fell on deaf ears at the beginning of our journey in the crypto space, because these guys needed to get to market with their systems as fast as possible and needed to produce rev as fast as they can. But as Russ was saying, the next generation of miners, there's going to be a longer look at how long are these going to last? What's the, how reliable are they going to be, and how reliable are the systems going to be around the miners through that time? And so that's kind of the bespoke thing we talk about in our booth is we're there to set up to where the clients or the clients' miners are, which is their investment, their assets, to last the longest it can, based on our methodology coming in from all the other industries.
I'll also add something there. Our miner manufacturers and designers are getting more sophisticated. I see our friends at Oradon sitting out here. They introduced yesterday their new models. They have an air-cooled model and they have an immersion model. Over at Bitmain, they have a hydro model. So when you talk about different cooling environments, you're site-specific, you're design-specific, but also, if manufacturers are getting more sophisticated, it allows us as miners to also be more sophisticated. Because I can pick and say, okay, I want the model that's air-cooled because it's going to go in this facility, but if I'm going over here in one of these other environments, I want the immersion piece. And different air-cooled design versus immersion design, at the manufacturer level, you can make the machine a whole lot more efficient depending on if you know where it's going. Because like in the past when we did immersion, you had to take an air-cooled design machine, take it apart, and make it an immersion machine. But now you have the chance, I can talk to the miner manufacturer, say, I want the machine that you designed for immersion, and you're going to get better performance out of that machine. So I think miners are getting more sophisticated, and I think the mining manufacturers, the silicon guys, are also getting more sophisticated in their product offerings to folks like us.
No, I was going to just agree with that completely. Is that's one of the biggest things over the last 6 years watching that happen is miner manufacturers used to just kind of ignore it in the beginning, like, hey, we want to do this. And then we see large scale deployments of retrofit immersion systems where you're just taking miners apart and there's, a handful of different systems and everybody's just throwing these things together. Now the manufacturers are actually jumping into that and saying, okay, you want this, let's build it that way, has been, a really good thing to see. I would say up until this last, year or so, or with some of the newer manufacturers, that was just not really ever going to be a thing. So that's a huge benefit to, different types of cooling methodologies.
So previously, I know a lot of people said, I want to stay away from immersion because it avoids the warranty. Are you saying that's not going to be the case anymore as they're making purpose-built design for immersion?
Yeah, they actually warranty it, and that's exciting. Because before you dump it in oil and it wasn't warranted and something went wrong and they had to get the oil off it to fix it, it's a nightmare. If anybody hasn't taken miners from immersion back to air, you just don't understand yet. Yeah. And so that's a big deal, the fact that they're actually warranting them and, being able to do that. Because they're going to be drawing a lot more power. Once you put it in, you control that environment, you can start overclocking. You could play with the tuning of the miner. You could play with all the frequencies and actually try to get more out of that miner because you can control the environment. And so manufacturers that are willing to put a warranty behind that, that's a big deal because we go from taking a miner that was going to draw, 3,500 watts and, hey, let's make it draw 8,000 and see what happens. So it's a big deal.
I'm glad you mentioned Auradine. I saw that they announced 15 or 16 joules per terahash. How much more efficient do you think we're going to see some of these miners get? And I'll toss that kind of out to anybody.
Let me say something before that, because that's a hard question. I will say, I think from our mining manufacturers, and Mike alluded to this, coming from the traditional industry, our industry is going to move a whole lot, not this halving, but by the next halving, our industry is going to have to move a whole lot closer to the traditional data center world, the traditional immersion world, and I also think we're going to see our miner manufacturers move into that environment as well, because so far we've taken, literally guys, the S9 was just designed to be lifted and shifted from the Mongolian desert down into a rainy environment, and it was designed for that. So we took a shoebox design, and it was brilliant. It's the AK-47 of miners, but all we've done is just modified that over and over again, but it was not designed for the sophistication that we can now have. It was designed to be put in a bag and carried like a satchel somewhere else and then replugged in again. And I think the more sophisticated we get as an industry, our manufacturers get more sophisticated, but we're going to move a lot more towards walking into a traditional blade environment. I know I didn't answer your question about joules because I'm under a lot of NDAs.
Yeah, and I think that's important. And I've been asking for a long time, and you see some different people that tried to get into miner manufacturing space that, hey, we're going to do this for you design, we're going to do this design, and then I never actually see it come to fruition. And I was talking with the gentleman earlier, the main reason is we've already built all these facilities that fit the toasters. And if I'm going to get a 4U rack instead of my toasters, then it changes things, right? You got to plan for that. So it'd be more, hey, we got to our next facility, we'll build it for that, and we'll purpose build those miners for it. Makes a lot more sense. But I agree that we got to start moving in that direction, assuming that there's efficiencies to be gained there. As far as I think it was like before last halving, we're always talking about, hey, how far can it go? So we're at 14 nanometer and the chip drops down, and we see it drop down. And we're like, actually had this question asked a few years ago at another conference, when do we hit that end of Moore's law of being able to just continue to ramp efficiencies in these chips? And I've heard a few chip manufacturers and chip developers are like, Moore's law's dead. We're done. We're hitting the bottom of it. And there's other people like, nah, it's just going to keep going. We don't know where it's going to come from yet, but it's going to keep going. So I don't have any real answers to the question. I've literally seen the people making the chips on both sides of the spectrum. So I think it'll just be fun to kind of see. I expect the efficiencies, the gains in efficiencies to slow down. That's just me personally. I feel like they're not going to be able to get these leaps and bound gains of efficiency every couple of years that they were getting before. Things are just getting super small and electrons just jump.
Yeah, I kind of just attack onto that. What's going on in the traditional data center space is, several colo guys would build data centers at 5 to 10 kilowatt density per rack, and so all the non-traditional ways to air condition that data hall would only start happening when the density requirements per rack would reach 20 or 25 kilowatts per rack, and so the traditional data center space has been through this bumpy road of applying immersion and hydro, and hydro can be, we call it a chilled door or rear door heat exchanger, or it could be direct liquid to chip with a heat exchanger over the processor. So all that's, coming, and the technology of all the alternative sources from air are really being deployed in that market space very quickly. And the mining space is going to learn a lot from that. And I think it's going to be pretty exciting for the future as densities continue to grow. The mining companies continue to look for longer life out of that particular asset, that miner that they purchase. So we got some real exciting times coming up, and then a halving event in 28 or so that, we'll start forcing maybe forcing is the wrong term, but maybe considering the mining companies to look more into these alternative cooling technologies.
We've seen a few miners recently announce that they're getting into AI, which is more of the traditional data center compute, has a lot different CapEx associated with it. How much of lessons learned in your history mining actually, translate over past the capacity? So in the cooling space, does much of that translate over to traditional data center lessons learned?
They are two different worlds other than power footprint.
All right. That's kind of the question the answer I assumed, but
I think it's interesting because as you look at, a lot of the people are jumping in with the AI, right? So what does AI do? We're either training models or we're doing inference. And like if you're just running the model that's already trained, how much uptime does it need? Like the Bitcoin mining space, we take advantage of the fact that we can turn off. Like, if Core turns off a bunch of miners, it doesn't stop Bitcoin. If we turn off a bunch of miners, it doesn't stop Bitcoin. And whereas when you're dealing with the traditional space, they look for more uptime, because if someone wants to ask ChatGPT tomorrow, hey, what recipe should I cook for breakfast when I have these ingredients? And, the data center that you're reaching out to is curtailing because of 4CP and ERCOT, like that's not necessarily going to be the most optimal situation. So I think that's the biggest break between Bitcoin mining data centers and traditional or even AI data centers is, and when you look at that, like, are you going to be able to bridge that gap? Are there workloads with these, new GPUs that can be intermittent? So we can take our advantages we take in Bitcoin mining on how we work with power grids, how we work with energy systems to help stabilize them to, we'll take load when no one else will. So when solar and wind are producing and no one's buying it, we'll come buy that power and consume it so they can keep the blades turning and keep the solar turned on. But when you look at a traditional space, they're not willing to then shut off when the power is not there. So I think that's the biggest bridge to cross and see if there's workloads in the AI space that can take advantage of that or not. If not, then, our low-cost models may not be best suited for that. And then we're just, competing in the normal space with everybody. I think if you're going head-to-head with an Amazon or something like that, hey, good luck.
And I will add this. they're very different animals, but there will be some Bitcoin miners, especially those that have heavy data center backgrounds, that will have facilities that can transition into that space. We have one center that's been running DGXs since 2019. We're the first DGX-ready data center in North America. So with the right experience, you can. But he hit on a very good point in that with large language models, it's all workload dependent, and there will be some workload dependencies that will work in that environment. And one thing Bitcoin miners are very good at is moving fast and building fast and taking these enormous power footprints. And with large language models in the AI space, the amount of GPUs you do need a big power footprint.
Oh, yeah.
But it's going to be workload dependent, because you're absolutely right. With the way we've grown ourselves is using curtailments and that kind of stuff. So you have to in order to get a power price where you're at. So right now at Core, our fleet-wide power costs across the whole country is $4.25, I think, like for on average, which is actually kind of high for Bitcoin miners. But if I'm actually running a bunch of large language model workload data centers, that's not very high at all. But you got to have an idea that your CapEx involved is completely different animal. Our top of the line air cooled environments run about $500,000 a megawatt right now for us to build. If you're looking at a tier 1 N+1 data center where you're going to stack a bunch of GPUs in it, you're at a minimum $8 million. If you're going to go to a 2N, you're like $12 million a megawatt. So your CapEx environments are completely different. Now your revenue environment is also completely different. You know, you get it returned back pretty fast, but it's just a different environment. So it's really going to be team specific, it's going to be experience specific, and it's going to be location of your data center, or your location of your power footprint. Those of us that have power footprints that might be near kind of an NFL market where you're close to some telecom closes so you can connect to the rest of the internet pretty fast, you might find some people really getting into the space. But again, the CapEx involved is completely different animal, and the time involved to build. I mean,
So will that ever blend in this space? Because I mean, more times than not, I get approached about, we want to build a Bitcoin facility or digital asset mining facility, but we want to build it with, like a tier 1, tier 2 data center thought in mind to pivot, just in the event anything happens in the digital asset mining space. And, you did exactly what I tell clients is like, you have to get your wallet out because it's going to be a different animal to do that. But I often wonder, in the future is the colo guys, the big colo guys, QTS, Vantage, Stream, and even the specific ones like Amazon and Microsoft and Google, are they going to pivot to get in this space with all their facilities and their real estate and their power that they have? Is there a cross-pollination ever coming in the future?
Like those guys getting into the mining space? I highly doubt it.
I mean, if you think it's going to evolve over time, it's not that crazy. So, whenever you started,
Way off track.
you probably never imagined Denton would be built the way it was when you first started. So, I don't think it's too crazy. One of the more niche conversations, and it ties into cooling, is waste heat. We see some interesting projects here and there, greenhouses in certain areas. Obviously, the waste heat in Texas is, there's not much to do with it currently. Do you think that's a market that's going to evolve as we are, expending a bunch of energy? It is creating heat. Is that going to be recycled at some point? What are the limiting factors?
So I think it's actually really cool because there's, like when you look outside the U.S. and you get to other countries, there's countries with like centralized heating systems in which they take industrial heat, pump it into water, and pump it through the entire town and city to create this heat. And there's actually a heat market. So if you can add heat to that water that's going through and heating the community, you actually get paid for that. And so I've looked into a few of those projects, more recently than not. And it's actually really exciting that things like that could happen because a lot of those countries also don't have advantageous power rates. It's extremely expensive. So you wouldn't normally go there to run Bitcoin miners, but because you can offset that cost with the heat, it becomes something that seems like, hey, this could be interesting, might make a fit because we could participate in this heat market separate from the energy market. Also watched a handful of greenhouse projects come to walk down that path and get to the point of heating. A lot of greenhouses, they essentially are paying for natural gas to run natural gas heaters or even run gensets to run electric heaters to heat greenhouses when they otherwise wouldn't be growing. I'm from Colorado. And so you have like 4 months in which all the greenhouses just shut down and shut off. And we're talking about the actual vegetable greenhouses in Colorado. The other ones never shut off. And so it's always been interesting because I've tried to figure out ways like, hey guys, I'll I'll sit there and we'll use the same amount of power, and I'll just give you the heat, and then you guys pay the power bill and let me mine Bitcoin there. And never really got to fruition on a lot of those, but I think there's a big crossover there, because anytime, like, all Bitcoin miners really do is just turn electricity into heat at like 97% efficiency. It's really awesome.
Yeah, there actually is I'm glad you touched on that. There actually is a massive project in Wyoming, a hyperscale project that's using immersion for their facility in a traditional data center setup, and they're using all the waste heat from that to the agricultural community for farming, all sorts of things. So that's a project that's going on, like, right now, that's going to take that waste that you talked about and actually use it for food production.
Yeah, I was going to add, as silicon keeps compressing, we as miners, our whole space is going to have to find every joule per terahash efficiency gain we can. It's going to come in the PSU. It's going to come in the form of our substation through our medium voltage all the way down to the plug. And then just my personal opinion, I think the waste heat, and it's going to come actually from guys like the ones sitting beside me here, immersion systems, I think, when they're taking that waste heat from the oil or water, and they have to do something with it, and it's going to turn around and use it to create more electricity. So I think when we look out, not at this halving, but the next halving and the one after that, when you're trying to find those very, very tiny efficiency gains and you're trying to squeeze it all out, heat recovery and use is going to be one of those places.
And there's some other things with like waste heat that's interesting. Like when you generate power at like natural gas facilities, the generators make a lot of heat. They actually make chillers to convert that into like freezing cold fluids. And that's something I've always actually been interested in trying to do, is take a nat gas site and put a train chiller on the gen set. One, there's some good tax credits for that. But then use it to just cool these miners, because you can get some super cool temperatures, like sub-freezing water temps, and be able to actually turn the heat into free air conditioning for these facilities. So
one of the better points I've heard on the topic was basically where the heat is at currently, it's not as useful as if it was a lot hotter, closer to a boiling point. So, basically put it into a steam generator. Do you think that the miner manufacturers, are there limitations there, or do you think that they can build the durability up to where they're now running at peak efficiency in those higher temp environments?
I was going to say, I don't know when things start to fall apart. I know that they have to be, if they're too cold, they break, or they don't run as well. If they're too hot, then they stop running and they break too. But I think if you think about it, like whenever you're going into a turbine or something like that, anytime you can preheat the fluid, right, it just gets you that higher set point. Then you have to put less energy in the next set to heat it up again. So any application where you need to heat a fluid or even the air, we're just generating heat. So as long as there's a application where we can start you at a higher point than what you're starting at. If you're pulling well water at 50 degrees, Fahrenheit versus getting it off of a miner at, some much higher temperature, then you're going to put less energy in to heat that fluid if you need it for a heating system.
That's a progression of, both, any server or mining rig or whatever. It just made me go back and think, in 1997, we were selling chillers into the traditional data center space with a 45 or 50 degree Fahrenheit discharge. And so today, all the chillers we're ordering and designing are 75 and 80 degree discharge. So the server's capability to, be cooled and be cool, I guess, and be reliable at a higher temperature is still, we haven't kind of reached that, the top of that yet, but I think we're getting pretty close, honestly. I mean, I'm with Shannon, like, at what point are these things going to fall apart? What temperature? So is it going to be 120 Fahrenheit, 125 Fahrenheit? We're getting pretty close.
Awesome. Our clock's winding down, so I'd like to take this time to thank Lee Bratcher and the Texas Blockchain for having us out here. Russell Cam with Core Scientific, Mike Donovan, his booth is right over there by the 500 sign.
Jacuzzi over there.
Free koozie over there, and he will help you with your design. And Shannon Squires, thank you guys very much. Have thoroughly enjoyed it. Any closing thoughts? All right. Thank you all for attending.
Hey guys, thanks for coming out to the 2023 North American Blockchain Summit. It was the best summit yet. We look forward to hosting you again next year. If you enjoyed the summit or like what you saw in this video, be sure to subscribe. If you're interested in learning more about membership in the TBC, go to texasblockchaincouncil.org to learn more.